I was 25 when I found out my parents had spent my entire $80,000 inheritance on my sister's credit card debt. Not borrowed, not invested. Spent. All of it. Gone. Without a single conversation, signature, or warning. My name's Caleb, and I've always been the quiet one in the family. You know the type. Low maintenance. Kept my head down. Never caused a scene. I didn't get into trouble growing up. Didn't throw tantrums at the mall. Didn't demand the latest iPhone every year. And maybe that's why they thought I wouldn't notice. Or maybe they just assumed I'd take it like I always did, with silence. I grew up in a small town with two very different parents. My dad was a high school history teacher, stoic, stiff-lipped, always quoting presidents like they were scripture. My mom ran a part-time catering business out of our kitchen, but more often than not she was too busy managing everyone else's emotions to worry about her own. And then there was Sadie, my older sister by 3 years, and the undisputed queen of our household. Sadie could do no wrong. When she totaled her first car at 18 while texting, Dad called it an accident. When I cracked a window with a baseball at 12, it was reckless behavior. Sadie dropped out of college twice. I graduated early. Guess which one got the bigger graduation party? It wasn't like I hated her. Not at first. I just accepted our roles. She was the emotional one, the storm. I was the calm. I became good at disappearing, spending hours in the garage tinkering with old tech or riding my bike around the block, earbuds in, just trying to breathe without someone asking me to give more. I figured if I stayed out of the way long enough, one day they'd finally see me. Not just as Sadie's little brother or the easy one, but as a person with my own life. That life finally started coming together when I was 23. My grandfather passed away, my mom's dad, and left behind a modest estate. I was stunned when the lawyer called and said Grandpa had left me $80,000. I didn't even know he liked me that much. We weren't particularly close, but I always made a point to ask about his garden or his worst stories when we visited. Apparently, that mattered more than I thought. The money was meant to help me buy my first house. That's what the note said, handwritten in Grandpa's shaky pen. For Caleb, so you can build something of your own. I didn't touch the money right away. I was still renting a tiny studio apartment and working a full-time IT support job downtown. I figured I'd save it until I found the right place. It was comforting just knowing it was there, this invisible foundation under my feet. I checked the account maybe once a month. Then, one day, it was gone. It happened on a gray Tuesday in April. I remember because I was on lunch break, half listening to a podcast while checking my bank balance. I blinked at the screen, refreshed the page 3 times, and then just stared. $138.74. That was it. I called the bank in a panic, thinking it had to be a mistake. Fraud, maybe. Some kind of system error. But after a long chain of transfers and on-hold music, I got my answer. The funds were legally withdrawn by the co-signatory, the rep explained flatly. Co-signatory? I asked, my voice hollow. Yes. The account was set up as a custodial trust under your parents' name until you turned 25. My birthday had been 2 weeks ago. I had just turned 25. I hung up without another word and sat there staring at the wall of the break room like someone had cut the floor out from under me. My chest felt tight. Not like I was going to cry, more like I was going to throw up. I called my mom first, and she answered like everything was completely normal. Hi, honey. How's work? Where's the money? I asked, skipping the small talk. There was a pause. A long one. And then, her voice changed. Caleb, please don't be dramatic. We needed it for Sadie. I swear to you. I didn't say anything for a full 10 seconds. I just stood there gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. What do you mean needed it for Sadie? She was drowning in debt. Caleb, she said, with this wounded tone, like I had somehow hurt her. Credit cards, student loans. Her car was going to be repossessed. And you thought my inheritance was the solution? Don't raise your voice, she snapped, like I was a child again. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't even angry yet. I was stunned, numb, floating. My dad got on the phone next. His voice was as cold as ever. You weren't doing anything with it, he said. Sadie needed help. Families help each other. Your grandfather would have wanted that. I wanted to scream. But instead, I asked one question. Why didn't you ask me? Silence. We knew you'd say no, my mom finally whispered. That's when something in me cracked. Not shattered, not exploded. Cracked, like the first line through the ice. The moment I realized just how little they saw me. Not as an adult, not as an equal, not even as someone worth asking. I was a resource to them, a silent piggy bank. I hung up the phone. I didn't text them for weeks after that. Every time I saw a photo of Sadie smiling on Instagram, flaunting some new shoes, or posting selfies at brunch, I felt my stomach twist. She had no idea what they'd taken from me. Or maybe she did. Maybe she was in on it. But I couldn't bear to find out. Not yet. That summer, I picked up extra hours at work and stopped ordering takeout. I was rebuilding, brick by brick, from scratch. I never told anyone at the office what happened. I just told them I was saving for a down payment, because I still planned to buy a home. That dream wasn't gone. It was just on life support. It wasn't until Thanksgiving that I saw them again. They invited me, as always, to Sadie's house, because of course, she was hosting. I almost didn't go, but something told me to show up. I needed to see them. I needed to look into their eyes and know whether they felt even a shred of guilt. I walked in with a bottle of wine and a fake smile. My mom hugged me too tight. My dad gave me a stiff nod. Sadie barely looked up from her phone. "Hey, little bro," she said flatly. "Glad you made it." Dinner was a blur of small talk and awkward silences. I barely ate. I kept staring at the crystal chandelier above the dining table, thinking about how much it probably cost. And then, as if on cue, my mom brought it up. "I heard interest rates are going up," she said casually. "You better buy a house soon, Caleb." I nearly choked on my water. "Yeah," I said quietly. "If only I had the money." Sadie laughed like she didn't catch the tone. My dad just cleared his throat. "Well," he muttered, "you can always move back home if you need to." I didn't reply. I just stared at my plate while my blood simmered under my skin. That was the first real crack. The first shift in how I saw them. Not as flawed people, but as takers, manipulators, people who only saw what I could give them and never what they'd taken. I didn't know it yet, but that night was the beginning of the end. If Thanksgiving was the first crack, then Christmas was the earthquake. I didn't go in expecting a hallmark moment. After what happened with the inheritance, my trust in my parents and sister was hanging by a thread, frayed, fragile, and one pull away from snapping. But I still showed up, hoping maybe, someone would bring it up. A simple "I'm sorry" would have gone a long way. An acknowledgement. Anything. I drove up to Sadie's house in a car that rattled every time I went over 60. She lived in the suburbs now, in one of those new cookie-cutter developments where every house had a different shade of beige and a Lexus in the driveway. I parked around the corner to make room for guests more important, as my dad had once passive-aggressively joked during a barbecue last summer. Sadie greeted me at the door in a red dress and matching heels. She looked like someone who hadn't known struggle in years. Her smile was wide, a little too wide, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Caleb," she sang. "About time. We were starting to wonder if you bailed." I glanced at my watch. "I'm 10 minutes early." She laughed like it was a joke, even though it wasn't. Then she turned and walked back inside without another word. The house was packed, extended family friends, co-workers of my parents, even a neighbor or two. I recognized a few faces from childhood Thanksgivings, older now, rounder, grayer. My parents were already deep in conversation with someone I didn't recognize. My dad saw me and gave the universal dad nod. My mom waved, distracted. No one said, "Hey, Caleb, how are you holding up?" No one asked about my job, my life, or even offered a drink. I drifted like a ghost between conversations, nibbling on a cracker and trying not to check my phone too much. Then I heard it, my name, from across the room. Loud, clear, from Sadie. "Caleb doesn't mind," she was saying. "He's always been the quiet one. Easygoing. That's why Mom and Dad knew they could count on him with the money situation." Laughter. From multiple people. I felt it like a slap. I walked closer, and my stomach dropped as I realized what she was doing. Telling a story. About my inheritance. About my money. Like it was a funny family anecdote, not the betrayal that had gutted me. "Oh, come on," she said, grinning at the group. He wasn't using it. It was just sitting there. And I was, like, buried. 20 grand in credit card debt. My car was in the shop. Rent was late. So Mom and Dad just did what they had to do. One of her friends chimed in. "Exactly," Sadie said, beaming. It was a family decision. I stepped into the group, quietly, but the air changed immediately. Sadie blinked. "Oh, hey, Caleb." The others shifted uncomfortably. My mother swooped in, wine glass in hand. "Sweetheart, we were just telling the story. Don't be so sensitive." You mean the story where you took the money Grandpa left for me and gave it to Sadie like I didn't exist? A few people gasped. My dad's face turned to stone. Caleb, he warned. No, I'm curious, I said louder now. Why is it funny? That you stole from me? That you didn't even ask? That I found out because my bank balance hit the floor and I thought I was the victim of fraud? It wasn't stealing, Sadie muttered, her smile gone. It was helping. It was my money, I snapped. I was going to use it to buy a house, to build a future. Instead, I'm still renting a shoebox while you flaunt your new backsplash on Instagram. Don't be petty, my mom said. You've always been so good with money. We knew you'd land on your feet. That's when I lost it. Not yelling, not throwing things. I just laughed. A long, bitter, exhausted laugh that made everyone in the room fall quiet. You used my responsibility as an excuse to reward her recklessness. And you think I'm the one who should be grateful? I didn't stay for dinner. I left that night with something new in my chest, something sharper than disappointment. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about what it revealed. The pecking order. The fact that in my family's eyes, I would always be the fallback plan, the second thought, the spare key under the mat. Useful when needed, ignored when not. I spent the rest of the holiday alone in my apartment, microwaving leftovers from the grocery store and staring at the walls. And still, no apology. No text. Nothing. Then came the call. It was early February. Cold. Slushy snow caked the sidewalks, and I was battling a nasty flu when my phone buzzed. It was my mom. Hey, I croaked. Her voice was unusually tight. Caleb, we need to talk. I braced myself. What's wrong? We've run into some trouble. My pulse ticked up. What kind of trouble? Financial, she said. The mortgage is upside down. Your father's pension isn't covering what we thought it would, and the interest rates. Well, it's complicated. I stayed quiet, waiting. We're losing the house, she finally said. I didn't respond right away. I didn't know how to. 1,000 thoughts raced through my head. Memories of that living room. That old recliner where Dad used to fall asleep with a book on his chest. The kitchen where Mom made cinnamon rolls every New Year's morning. The hallway where I stood listening outside doors, always on the outside looking in. Caleb, she said again, softer now. We need a place to stay. Just for a while. There it was. You want to move in with me? Just until we get back on our feet. I looked around my apartment. It was barely big enough for one person, let alone 3. But even if I had a mansion, it wouldn't have mattered. You know I don't have the space, I said. We can make it work. It won't be forever. What about Sadie? I asked. Silence. She's not an option, Mom finally said. I could feel the unspoken words hanging in the air. Of course Sadie wasn't an option. She had her life. Her perfect house. Her excuses. Caleb, Mom said again, her voice almost breaking, we need you. And for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't need them. Not their approval. Not their scraps of affection. Not even their presence. I had spent most of my life bending to their needs, their expectations, their rules. But that moment, their desperation, their assumption that I'd just say yes, that's when something shifted in me completely. I didn't give her an answer right away. I told her I'd think about it. I hung up and stared at my phone, and for the first time in years, I started planning. Not how to save them, how to show them, to remind them what they had taught me, that actions have consequences, that some doors, once closed, don't reopen, and that sometimes the quiet ones remember everything. But that turning point, it didn't come until the rain, until the knock on my door, until the moment I stepped outside, saw them drenched and shivering, and made a single phone call. After that call in February, I didn't hear from them for a while. 2, maybe 3 weeks. Long enough for the silence to settle in like dust. I thought maybe they were figuring things out. Maybe they'd stay with a cousin or finally lean on Sadie, the favorite. But when my phone buzzed again in March and I saw Mom flashing on the screen, I knew the silence had only been a prelude. This time, she didn't ask. She told, we've sold most of the furniture. Just keeping the essentials. Your father's truck broke down last week. We're thinking of driving up next Friday. Hope that works. No question. No, do you have space? Just the assumption that I'd rearrange my life around theirs, like I always had. I didn't respond. Not right away. I needed time, not just to process, but to prepare. Because something had shifted in me after that Christmas. After the inheritance. After the phone call where they admitted they'd never even considered asking me first. I wasn't just their backup plan anymore. I was their last resort. And I didn't want to be either. That night, I opened my laptop and started something I hadn't done in years. I applied for a new job. I'd been in IT support since college. Same company, same beige cubicle, same tired scripts, and have you tried turning it off and on again? But I had skills. I wasn't flashy, but I was smart. I knew systems, automation, data architecture. So I poured myself into it. I worked during the day, then spent my evenings taking online certifications, cloud infrastructure, DevOps pipelines, Python scripting. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a way out. I gave myself a 6-month plan. Not to escape them, to reclaim myself. The first rejection came fast. Then another, and another. But each time I improved, sharpened my resume, rewrote my cover letters, redid my portfolio. I stopped scrolling social media. I stopped waiting for texts that would never come. I started sleeping better. Some nights, I'd walk the city just to breathe. Headphones in, hoodie up, invisible in the crowd. I'd pass by real estate signs, bars full of laughter, couples arguing on street corners, and I'd feel nothing. Not envy, not sadness, just distance. Like I was on the edge of something bigger than I could see yet. In April, I got a call from a startup. They were looking for a back-end engineer, someone who could build and optimize internal tools. I did a take-home project, nailed the interview, and got the offer a week later. It paid 60% more than my old job. Remote. Full benefits. Stock options. I took it without hesitation. With my new income, I finally started saving again. Not for a house, not yet. For security. For leverage. For the version of myself that didn't flinch every time my mom's name appeared on my caller ID. Meanwhile, the updates trickled in. Sadie texted me once, some vague, "Hey, Mom and Dad said you're being distant. Hope everything's okay." I didn't respond. They hadn't shown up yet, and I knew they were waiting for me to fold. To make the offer. To be the good son. I never did. Instead, I started looking at apartments. I moved in June. A 2-bedroom this time. Still modest, still simple, but mine. High ceilings. Big windows. Quiet neighbors. A kitchen I actually wanted to cook in. I signed the lease, hired movers, and didn't tell my parents. I left no forwarding address. I switched my number to a new line and only gave it to friends I trusted. I disappeared. That summer was the first time I felt free. Not happy necessarily. Not healed, but unburdened. There were no more Sunday guilt texts. No awkward family dinners. No passive-aggressive, just checking in. Messages with underlying expectations. Just silence. And for the first time in my life, I found peace in it. I started running. Not for fitness, though that came too, but to clear my head. To hear my own breathing. To remember that I was alive. I'd run down the river path at sunset, earbuds filled with ambient music, letting the tension drip out of me with every step. It became a kind of ritual. My reset. By September, I'd been promoted. By October, I'd launched a side project, a cloud optimization tool I built in my free time, that started gaining traction in a few developer communities. A recruiter reached out asking if I'd ever considered founding a startup. I laughed at first. Me? Caleb? The backup plan? The forgotten son? But something inside me whispered, why not you? I didn't go all in. Not yet. But I started drafting ideas. Wireframes. Business plans. I had no illusions of grandeur. I just wanted something that was mine. Something no one could take from me. Not with a signature. Not with a guilt trip. Not with a family vote. And in the quiet of that rebuilding phase, I started remembering who I'd been before all of this. Before the theft. Before the favoritism. Before the constant comparisons to Sadie. I remembered the kid who used to fix broken radios just to see how they worked. The teenager who once coded an entire website in Notepad. The college student who got a scholarship and never asked his parents for a dime because he didn't want to be a burden. I wasn't a burden. I never had been. They just needed me to believe I was so they could justify the way they treated me. That realization hit me like a freight train. One morning in November, I was sipping coffee on my balcony when my new phone, buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. I hesitated before answering. Hello. There was silence. Then a voice I hadn't heard in almost a year. Caleb. It was my father. I said nothing. Look, I know things have been tense. And I know we might have made some mistakes. Might have. I said flatly. He sighed. We're in town. Things haven't been easy. We've been staying at a motel. Ran through most of our savings. Your mother's been sick. We just thought. Maybe we could talk. In person, I could hear rain in the background. I pictured them standing under a streetlight, bags at their feet, damp coats clinging to their backs. I could have said no. I wanted to say no. But instead, I gave them an address. Not mine. An empty parking lot next to a small park. I told them to meet me there in an hour. And I showed up. I watched them pull in, their car sputtering. My mother stepped out first, hunched under an umbrella, looking thinner than I remembered. My father followed, his face harder to read. "Thank you for coming," my mom said, her voice trembling. I didn't smile. "I'm not here to offer you a room," I said. Her lips parted, stunned. My dad's jaw clenched. "We're your parents," he said. "I was your son," I replied. "Until you made me an ATM." It started raining harder. "Caleb," my mom tried again, her voice cracking. "I'm making a call," I said, pulling out my phone. "To who?" she asked, panic creeping in. I didn't answer. I walked a few feet away, turned my back to them, and dialed. That moment, the silence behind me, the rain soaking into my hoodie, the cold air biting my fingers, that was the moment everything crystallized. This wasn't revenge. This was justice. This was the culmination of years of being overlooked, used, and discarded. My fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before I pressed call. I wasn't dialing the police, and I wasn't calling an Uber. I was calling someone else. Someone who had been waiting for this just as long as I had, if not longer. "Hey," I said, voice calm despite the storm behind me. "They're here, in the lot, just like we expected." There was a pause on the other end. Then, "I'll be there in 10. I hung up. Behind me, I could feel them staring. My parents, drenched, desperate, and now, uneasy. My mom called out first. "Caleb, who was that?" I didn't answer. I turned, looked them both in the eyes, and said, "Someone who remembers what you did." And then I walked away, leaving them standing in the rain like I had stood in their silence all those years. Because this was no longer about money. This was about respect, dignity, accountability. And it was time they felt what it was like to lose control. 3 months earlier, I started planning. It began the night I moved into my new place. I stood in my empty kitchen, flipping a cold beer in one hand, laptop open on the counter, when an email popped up from someone I hadn't spoken to since college. Jacob. He had been my roommate for 2 years back, when we were broke students trying to turn side gigs into salaries. We bonded over cheap ramen and crashed servers. But after graduation, we went our separate ways. I took a job. He took a risk. Started his own firm. Consulting, then app development, and now, property tech. I'd messaged him earlier that week, just to reconnect. And now here he was, offering to meet up. "You ever think about going in on something real?" he asked when we finally met up at a downtown cafe. "What do you mean?" "I mean property. Land. Development. Tech's good, but it's all built on sand. Real estate. That's rock. I've got investors. Partners. But I need someone who knows back-end infrastructure, automation, databases. I remember you had a knack for clean systems." I told him I'd think about it. And I did. For weeks. Not because I needed the money, but because I needed something bigger. A new identity. A legacy that wasn't just about surviving betrayal, but about building something stronger in its place. That's when I started sketching the framework. Not just for the software, but for the revenge. I didn't want to humiliate my parents. I wanted to outgrow them. I wanted to become someone who didn't need them, didn't chase their love, didn't crave their praise. But that didn't mean I wouldn't expose the truth. Because behind every betrayal, there's a pattern. And if I could prove the pattern, not just to myself, but to the people around them, I could take away the one thing they still held on to. Their reputation. I began quietly. First, I reached out to my grandfather's estate lawyer, the same one who had handled the inheritance. I asked if there had been any documentation, any clause, that specifically restricted the funds for my personal use. There had been. The letter my grandfather wrote had been more than sentimental. It was attached to the trust itself. This money is to be held for Caleb's first home, and only to be released to him upon his 25th birthday. That clause meant my parents hadn't just made a selfish decision. They had committed breach of trust. Technically, the lawyer said, you have grounds for legal action, but it's going to come down to whether you want to go after them in court. Emotionally, financially, it's a big fight. I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure if I wanted a courtroom battle. That wasn't the revenge I wanted. I wanted a public undoing. A reckoning. Not with handcuffs, but with consequences. So I made a new plan. Every Sunday that summer, I met up with Jacob. We started working on the property platform together, a site that streamlined land auctions, investment portfolios, and historical deed data. I helped design the backend and automate data pulls from public databases. While I worked, I searched. And then, one Sunday in late August, I found something. My parents hadn't just lost their house because of poor money management. They had leveraged it against Sadie's business, a boutique fashion startup she'd launched 2 years ago, the one with the fancy Instagram and zero actual profits. My parents had co-signed a loan to help her open a second location. And when it flopped, because she didn't pay taxes, didn't understand payroll, didn't even track inventory, the bank foreclosed on their house. I pulled the public filings. Everything was there. The lien, the bank letters, the auction date. They weren't victims of the economy. They were victims of their own favoritism. And I had the proof. Next, I contacted someone I hadn't spoken to since high school, Tasha. She was Sadie's old best friend. Well, ex-best friend, from the way things ended. Tasha had been there for all of Sadie's early meltdowns. She knew the family. She'd been at birthdays, holidays, even those awkward backyard barbecues where Dad insisted on playing old jazz vinyls and quoting Reagan. We met for coffee, and she didn't hold back. Sadie never took anything seriously, Tasha said, sipping a cold brew. Your parents bailed her out so many times. Rent, parking tickets, that disaster of a trip to Bali. But the worst part was, she expected it. Like it was her right. And they always treated you like a side character. I didn't tell her everything. Just that I was working on something that would shine a light. You thinking of going public? She asked. Maybe. Let me know, she said. I've got screenshots. I raised my eyebrows. Of what? She grinned. Sadie venting in our old group chat, bragging about how she convinced your mom to borrow your inheritance. She called it a rescue mission. Like you were hoarding it or something. That's when I knew. This wasn't just selfishness. This was entitlement with a megaphone. I gathered everything. Messages, court documents, bank records, business filings, social posts. I built a timeline, a full dossier. I wrote the story out, piece by piece. Names redacted. But the facts? Crystal clear. Then I did what they would have never expected. I posted it. Anonymously, on a financial advice subreddit. My parents spent my inheritance to bail out my sister. Years later, they lost everything because of her again. It went viral. People dissected every detail. Some doubted, others empathized. But most were outraged. I would sue. Cut contact. Opie's parents deserve every cold night they've got coming. It wasn't about validation. It was about witnesses. And while they had no idea it was me, they soon felt the ripple. Because Sadie's brand, the one she was trying to relaunch online, it tanked. People dug. Screenshots surfaced. A local blogger even did a think piece on generational wealth theft, and several commenters connected the dots. And Jacob? He read the post too. You wrote that, didn't you? He asked one day over lunch. I didn't answer. He just smiled. You ready for the next step? The next step was why I made the call. The person I phoned in that parking lot wasn't a lawyer. And it wasn't Tasha. It was Jacob's business partner, Maya. She had just closed on a dozen foreclosed homes across the city. And guess whose childhood house had recently been auctioned off for a fraction of its value? That's right. I didn't buy it. She did. And I helped. With funds I'd earned myself. Through the platform I helped build. Through the life I rebuilt from the ashes of their betrayal. But what we planned to do with that house, that's where the real revenge started. Because I wasn't just going to deny them shelter. I was going to turn the last thing they thought they owned, their history, into a monument to their choices. And when I saw them standing in that rain-soaked lot, looking to me like a lifeline, they had no idea that the lifeline was long gone. That I wasn't there to save them. I was there to show them what I'd built without them. And what I was about to say would echo in their ears forever. I turned away from them in the rain as I ended the call. They stood behind me, soaked and silent, their plastic suitcases resting in puddles at their feet. My mom looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders hunched inward, eyes darting between my face and the building behind me like she was searching for an open window to climb through. My dad was stone-faced, lips tight, jaw clenched, not in anger, but in shame. The kind that comes not from guilt, but from powerlessness. You didn't have to call anyone, my mom said softly. We're not here to cause trouble. I turned back, slow and calm. But you already did. Before either of them could respond, A black Tesla rolled up the driveway, its tires sending up a sheet of mist. Maya stepped out in a sharp black coat and heels, holding an umbrella and a clipboard. My mom's expression shifted from hopeful to confused. My dad just squinted, probably assuming she was some sort of property manager. Maya walked up to me, offered a polite nod, then turned to them. "Mr. and Mrs. Archer?" she said. "Yes," my dad answered hesitantly. "My name is Maya Calderon. I'm the managing director of Axis Living, the property group that recently acquired 412 Bentwood Avenue." Their faces fell. "You bought our house?" my mom whispered. "Correct," Maya said, without even blinking. "It was acquired via foreclosure auction 3 months ago and is currently undergoing renovation for a new use." "But that was our house." Maya said firmly. "It's now part of a community housing project we're building for displaced veterans. The property is being repurposed into a support home and mentorship center." I stepped forward. "I helped design the program," I added. "Every room is being converted into living quarters, study spaces, or therapy offices. The garage is becoming a workshop for career training." My dad looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. "You're turning our house into a what?" "A shelter." "No," I said. "Into something useful." They didn't say anything. The rain dripped steadily from my dad's sleeves. My mom's lips trembled. "We came to you because we had nowhere else to go," she finally said. "And I gave you what you gave me," I replied. Silence. "That's not fair," she said. "Neither was spending my $80,000 inheritance on Sadie and never telling me. Neither was laughing about it at Christmas like it was some joke. Neither was acting like I owed you loyalty after you treated me like the spare part of this family." My dad opened his mouth, then closed it again. Maya checked her watch. "We have a contractor coming in 15 minutes. If you're not off the property, I'll have to call security." They didn't move. "Don't do this," my mom pleaded. "We're still your parents." I let out a slow breath, then nodded. "You are. And I'm still your son. The one you never really saw. The one you only turned to when you had nothing left." Then I reached into my coat pocket and handed them an envelope. My mom took it with trembling hands and opened it. Inside was a cashier's check, $5,000. "It's not a home," I said, "but it's enough for a hotel and a bus ticket. I'm giving you this not because I owe you anything, but because I'm not like you." Tears welled up in her eyes. My dad didn't say a word. "After this," I added, "we're done. No more calls. No more surprises. You made your choices, and I made mine." I turned to walk away. "Caleb," my father said. I paused but didn't turn. He spoke quietly, like someone admitting something he'd denied for years. "We were wrong." The rain drowned the rest. I kept walking. A year later, the community center opened its doors. The old house was unrecognizable. Fresh paint, solar panels, ramps for accessibility, and a new plaque out front with the name I'd chosen. The Archer House for renewal. It wasn't about them. It was about me. About reclaiming the name they tried to stain and using it for something good. I gave a speech at the opening. Kept it short. Honest. I was once the quiet kid in the background of every family photo. The one who was easy to ignore. Easy to use. But sometimes the ones who are silent the longest are the ones who hear the most and remember everything. Applause. I stepped down, shook hands, posed for photos. That night, I walked the old hallway where my childhood bedroom had been. It was now a reading room. A boy no older than 10 sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through a book on robotics. He looked up at me and smiled. "Hey," he said. "They said you made this place." I smiled back. "Yeah, I helped." He nodded, turned back to his book, and I stood there for a long time, just listening to the silence. But this time, it didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't destruction. It's transformation. And sometimes the strongest voice is the one that finally decides to speak.